Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
And here's something we don't always do, and that's Mary Kay Coughlin behind the camera, but you can't see her. And she doesn't have you really gonna put your hand there? Okay. She used to have a producer cam, but then we had to use it for something in the sanctuary, so there's no producer cam anymore, so you can't see her, and she would never turn it on anyway. So, hey, welcome to the show. If this is your first time joining us, let me tell you a little bit about what it's all about. The byline down there below us says it all. It's not really a byline. I keep saying that. A byline is like the name of a reporter. Catchphrase, whatever. Those words down there say it all. Water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. What we try to do on this show is we try to talk about whatever the people out there in the world are talking about, whether it be current events, whether it be the latest movie. I mean, Ben and I love talking about fashion trends. That's our, we did talk about the Met Gala last week. So, anyway, but what makes the show unique is we try to talk about them from a uniquely Christian perspective. So this is not a news program. This is a commentary program, and it's a Christian commentary program. So don't be trusting us for, your news reporting. We're just telling you, here's what we read. Here's what we think about it, trying to put Jesus Christ first. And how should Christians talk about these issues if Jesus Christ really is the most important thing in their life, the guiding principle of their lives. So hopefully we'll succeed in that. But it is a conversation show, not just between those of us up here. Somebody's calling me. I don't know who you are. Go away. I'm on the air. So, really? Yeah. Well, that's interesting. But we're live on the air. So maybe they'll leave a message or text us. So anyway, so see, now I lost my rhythm. I got a rhythm. This is every week. It's boom, 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 boom. And now I lost my rhythm. What was I talking about? Oh, you're invited to be part of the conversation. That's what I was talking about. It's a conversation-based program, but not just between us. It also involves you. And you are invited. Agree with us, disagree with us, ask us a question, make a comment, just be nice about it, whatever it is. And the way you can join in the conversation is if you are watching us on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel, put it right there in the live chat, and I will see it here on my screen. If you are watching it on the Trinity Joppa Facebook page, put it in the comments section there to the video, and I will also see that on my screen. If I don't see it, our producer, my wife Mary Kay, will hold up a sign to alert me to look down at the computer that there's a comment in one location or the other. And then as soon as there's a natural break in the conversation, we'll read your comment here live on the air. Again, as long as it's appropriate, keep it appropriate. And we can interact back and forth and, go whatever, ask this question, we'll answer it, respond, whatever you want to do. That is perfectly fine. If you are not watching us live, we are live every Wednesday at 5:30. If you are not watching us live, you are still invited to be part of the conversation. And the way you do that is by commenting on the YouTube video whenever you're watching it. I forgot that part.
Shows up right here.
No, not when you do what I'm talking about right now. It doesn't. Now I already went on to the after the fact kind of thing. You're right. If you comment live here with us tonight on YouTube or Facebook, it will appear over there to Ben's left in that little box. That's how you know your comment got through. But if you're not watching it live, you're watching us after the fact, you can still participate. Put your comment on the YouTube page, not the Facebook one, the YouTube one, and then we will take up those comments at the start of the next week's show. And we do have a couple comments from last week that I'll be bringing up here in just a second. But before I do want to give a little note of warning. I don't know if it's started yet, but we're supposed to have like some major storm tonight, I think.
Go figure.
Yeah, I know.
It happens on Wednesdays.
It happens on Wednesdays. Like every storm to hit Maryland has to hit on Wednesday. If you know the history, we had, probably about a month ago or so, we had a storm hit us that like knocked out the internet for a second. We actually lost our feed and we had to start a new stream. And then of course, most people didn't even realize we started a new stream, didn't know the show was still going on. So if we do lose the stream at some point tonight, go back to the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel, because if we have the ability to, we will go ahead and start a new stream, for part 2. And then a couple weeks ago, we had the remnants of Hurricane Ida come through.
Yes, we actually canceled.
That one we canceled because we didn't want to get flooded in here. So we'll see. I don't know how bad it's going to be, but hopefully we won't have any interruptions and we'll be able to go forward as normal tonight. So all that being said, join the conversation. We've got 4 stories we want to talk about tonight. It's a lot. Some of these I think might take a while, so we're going to dive right into our first one.
What about our comments from last week?
That's exactly what I meant by our first story. So we have 5 stories to talk about this week. We're including our comments from last week. Thank you, Ben. And these are all comments from Allison Mayer. And so I will go ahead and read the first one. They're on separate issues, so we can take them each individually. First one, we did talk a little bit about last week about the show The Chosen. And she says, sorry, guys, I'm not a fan of The Chosen. I didn't make it through the first episode. I can't reconcile the spiritual and social inconsistencies, i.e. the feminist American culture of Mary Magdalene, the creator's tolerance and acceptance of LDS Latter-day Saint beliefs, a bit ecumenical, and the concern that society will not approach the Bible as truth. Instead, this series will become truth. I hope that makes sense. I haven't seen it, so I have no opinion one way or another, but you have, so it's all on you.
No, I see where you're coming from, actually, and I think what I had said, correct me if I go back and listen to what I said last week, was I like the production value of the show, for sure. I think by and large, it's, as far as Christian media goes, doesn't always have the best track record with production value, so The Chosen definitely has a much better production value. But I think your comments are well taken in that there's definitely artistic license that's taken with this. I don't think quite to the degree of, like, say, the Noah movie or the
Last Temptation of Christ. Anybody seen that one?
No, I didn't see that one.
That is entirely artistic license.
Okay, yeah. So there's definitely they like fill in the gaps of conversations that may or may not have happened. So yeah, I think that's fair for sure. The producers, and again, I've only watched the first episode, so again, I can't really weigh in that much as far as what happens later in the series. But yeah, I think they've said that they try to remain, nothing is unbiblical. Take that for what it is, for what it means, or for how they mean it, I guess. But yeah, no, I think with anything like that, whenever you take artistic license, especially with the Bible, we do have to be skeptical. So I think that's fair. Yeah.
Okay, and I haven't seen it. I have no opinion. I'll just say I agree, and people can wonder what I'm agreeing to. The second comment here that Allison makes is back to the Met Gala. The theme was American independence. It's a showcase of political statements like Cara Delevingne's Peg the Patriarchy, equal rights for women, LGBTQ, like Dan Levy, and the nudity. And the second comment's also about Met Gala. This is, let's be honest, the only good part of the Met Gala are the memes that result.
I guess so.
I mean, I think your comment says, I don't know if it needs further comment. I mean, the Met Gala, and we touched on this a bit last week, it's definitely taken on a left-leaning political atmosphere. I mean, it's gotten to the point where what it's ostensibly for is that's my lawyer word for the night, ostensibly. What's ostensibly for is, just raise funds for this fashion exhibit, which you would think would be apolitical. It's just fashion, but it certainly has become more of a political event, rally, whatever.
When you start writing political slogans on clothing, I think you've crossed the line.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're not wrong there. And then the last one is, and this mammoth idea is crazy. And Allison teaches science, for those that don't know. So in science class, we discussed the concept of genetic engineering and the responsibility humans have to care for nature. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. There's any ethical line that humans need to respect. Not to mention the drastic change to the ecosystem this mammoth would cause. That last comment I wanted to pick up on, because I couldn't remember if I mentioned this last week or not, if we had time. It was one of the notes I had in one of the margins of that article. Is there was one of the, and maybe I did mention it, but there was an explanation they were proffering. It's like, well, we think that by re-injecting the mammoth into this environment, that'll trample down the bushes more, and it'll blah blah. I can't remember what the whole explanation was, but the idea is global warming will go away. Is essentially what the theory was. Yeah. And I remember I had a note in the margin like, how can you possibly know that?
I think you did mention that.
How can you possibly know that? It's such supposition upon supposition, wishful thinking, guesswork. And I agree with you, Allison, on this, especially this last comment about the drastic changes to the ecosystem. Have we learned nothing? I mean, that we humans in general, and I think this is speaking of a Christian perspective, I think you can see this running through Genesis right from the very beginning. Humans love to think we're in control, rather than God in control. And whenever we think we're in complete control, especially when we think we're in control of nature, we realize, oh, look, there's all these other factors that we didn't anticipate or didn't foresee. Yeah. And then things go haywire. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I don't think we could possibly imagine what the effect would be on the ecosystem, on the environment, by bringing back, essentially, we know it's really a hybrid animal, but essentially a deceased species back into the, and putting it back into the wild. There's a delicate balance in nature, and, in lots of ways, humanity has upset it, and that's, we are supposed to have good stewardship of God's creation. I think we failed in many regards in that case. But this is another example where I think if you're a good steward, don't try to play God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point you make there.
And Robert Koger says people just need to watch Jurassic Park. Yes, I think you made that point last week.
So, yeah. No, that's a good point about being stewards of creation. Yeah. Looking from a Christian perspective here, yeah, God has placed us in a unique role in the Earth's ecosystem, if you want to phrase it that way, that we are to be stewards of creation, including animals and our habitations. And so, yeah, I don't think we have done the best job at that, and I'm not sure that reintroducing an extinct species is going to rectify that.
Robert, if you say anything about your activities today or what you're doing, you're fired. I'm just saying, I love you, but you're not allowed to rub anything in anybody's face.
What's the time zone where you're at?
I don't know if he's... It's not that far off. Okay. I don't want to. I'm not going to disclose. Robert, don't you disclose where you are? I don't want to go on that. But because then people come hunt you down. And no, I'm kidding. but yeah, no, I don't think it's that substantially different from us. So, but yeah, let's just say Robert is someplace that's going to make us all jealous. Okay. So all right. Shall we move on to our first official story of the evening?
Sure thing.
All right. So this is one that's been going on for a little while, but it's really blown up over the past week, and that's the story of Gabby Petito. Gabby Petito and her fiance, Brian Laundrie, she's 22 years old. He's, 22-year-old, I should put it this way, 22-year-old Gabby Petito and 24-year-old Brian Laundrie were engaged, and they left at either late June, early July. They decided to go on a road trip across the country, basically. And so they rented a big van, and they kind of converted it into a camper, and they started going on a trip. She was posting various things on social media at the various different stops. And then really where the current story, I guess you could say, really begins is August 12th, 2021. On August 12th, outside police in Moab, Utah, responded to a call for a domestic incident that someone else called in, and they pulled up behind the van that was being driven by Mr. Laundrie, and then it actually swerves and kind of hits the curb. They pull it over in response to this complaint of a domestic altercation between, as it turns out, Miss Petito and Mr. Laundrie. This is all on body cam footage, which a number of people have seen. Miss Petito was crying. Mr. Laundrie says that she struck him with her phone. He had some blood on him, and essentially the police in that situation, they separated them for a while. It seems the approach they were taking is that Miss Petito was assumed to be the aggressor in an altercation. Other people disagree, and they think that there were warning signs in there of an abusive relationship, potentially. I'm not an expert in that regard. I have watched a good portion of that video, though.
One of them being a law enforcer, though, said that might have been signs of that.
Well, yeah, and there was a female, I think she was a park police officer, ranger, something like that came onto the scene and actually sat down with Miss Petito in the back of the patrol car for a while and talked to her and tried to tell her, say, hey, look, this looks like a toxic relationship to me. You got to get out of it. They separated for the night. That Miss Petito stayed in the van. They took Mr. Laundrie to a hotel, again, because allegedly he was the victim as they were seeing it at that point in time. And then the next day they got back together and they continued on their road trip. No charges were pressed because they were saying they were engaged and nobody wanted to. But it was a hard video to watch. I don't know if anybody's seen it. August 25th, so this is a few weeks later, about 13 days later, Miss Petito does post a photo on Instagram from what appears to be in Utah. And then her mother, Nicole Schmidt, says she got a call from her daughter that day from Grand Teton National Park. 2 days later, the mom gets a very unusual text. She describes it, that supposedly from her mom. And the text just says, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." The reference to Stan. Stan is her grandfather, and the mother said she found this odd because she didn't refer to him as Stan. So that seemed like an odd text. Then August 30th, 3 days later, she gets another text, supposedly from her daughter, that just says, "No signal in Yosemite," referring to Yosemite National Park in Northern California. Part of the reason that was also puzzling is because that's 3 days ago, the same day that her mother had received the previous phone call. Petito supposedly told a friend on Snapchat, keep in mind these are all methods where you can't actually see someone or hear their voice, on Snapchat, that she was headed to Yellowstone National Park. So Yellowstone is in Wyoming, not too far from where she was last calling her mom, that Grand Teton National Park, whereas Yosemite is all the way in California. I did a little Google search on it, or MapQuest. It's like 12 and a half hour drive away. Both start with the Y, though. Then on September 1st, 2021, Laundrie returns to Florida, to the home where they had been living with his parents, with the van, but without Gabby Petito. Robert Kogerda says, "Ben, we are in the same time zone. Ken, if you don't want to know, I won't tell you how many hours today I was in the pool having, shall we say, spirited beverages." You see, Robert, that's the kind of thing that puts your job in jeopardy. I'm just saying. Hey, walking a line, man, walking a line. Anyway, so then September 11th, Petito's mother, who I think lives in New York, that's where they departed from, reports her missing because she has not been able to get in touch with Gabby. In the meantime, what I guess makes this story, what has captured the attention, is not just the cross-country road trip behind all of it, and the dash cam footage of them just a few days before she went missing, but that Mr. Laundrie, when he returns to Florida, refused to talk to anybody. His family, for a while, refused to talk to anybody. They did eventually say some things for the FBI. And then he himself actually is, at least as of what I checked a few hours ago, is now missing. Where he left, I think earlier in the week, he left his home in Florida. His parents said he went to a,
another park nearby.
Yeah, it's a huge, I'll find the name of it here. The Carlton Reserve, a swampy 25,000 acre reserve in Venice, Florida. He went with a backpack. His parents said that's where told him he was going. We'll get to more of that in a second. But then September 19th, the FBI did find a body that has now been confirmed to be Gabby Petito near the Grand Teton National Park, which, if you'll recall, this was where she was when she last spoke to her mother, before the mysterious phone text about Stan and the TikTok or the no service. Before all that happened, that's where she was, and that's where her body was found. The preliminary autopsy, they don't have the final autopsy results yet, but the preliminary autopsy has come back and said that it was homicide. We don't know anything more specific than that at this point in time. In the meantime, Brian Laundrie has been stated to be a person of interest. Like I said, he said nothing to the police. He's kind of gone missing himself. And the latest thing, this is I just saw earlier this afternoon, while the authorities have been searching the Carlton Reserve a couple days ago, and they started again up yesterday. Supposedly today, an underwater dive team has come to the reserve. You don't want to make suppositions about anything necessarily, but an underwater dive team, this is a swampy area. A lot of it is underwater. You've got to think the police they can't possibly call on a dive team to search the entire reserve. It's way too much, which means they have something that they are inquiring about, targeting a specific area with divers, or they wouldn't be doing it. What that thing is, we can only guess, but there's things we've seen in the past when this type of thing happens. So we'll just have to wait and see. So anyway, so that's basically the history of this Gabby Petito scenario. Ben, what have your thoughts? You've been seeing all this go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking, of course, anytime that you see loss of life, and this is confirmed to be loss of life. Not only that, but homicide. So, and that's certainly heartbreaking. So first and foremost, we want to express our prayers for Gabby's family and anybody who's suffering heartbreak right now and grief. That's primarily the Christian response here. Let's take care of the people who are affected first, but also seeking justice. And I think certainly there's a responsibility to do that police are doing, and the FBI, it seems like they're doing their due diligence to bring Gabby's murderer to justice, however possible. I think one of the details there is that they also the FBI raided Mr. Laundrie's house and removed some evidence from there. So there's no word yet as to what they may have found in the house.
Right.
So I guess, I guess the caution is because it all looks very suspicious. We just want to be precautious not to jump to conclusions. We can have ideas. Now, those suppositions may prove to be true. But of course, that's the whole premise of our legal system is people are innocent until proven guilty. But it is very suspicious that Mr. Laundrie has gone silent when he's the person who would know the most about what happened to Gabby.
He certainly knows more than he's disclosed because he hasn't disclosed anything.
Yeah.
And we have video confirmation of him with her, and driving off with her. So yeah, it's always a struggle, I guess. When you hear things like this, it's tragic, and here's some of the things that bug me about the response to this. I mean, number one is I don't think I've ever heard anybody outright saying this, but I have heard a few people focusing on that video, the dash cam or the body cam video footage where she was treated as the aggressor, and there was blood on there were cuts on Mr. Laundrie's around his side of his eye. And it's like people won't come right out and say, "Oh, she was probably
in an abusive situation.
or people blaming her and saying, well, she probably did something to cause him to do X, Y, or Z." So they don't say it that way, but I've heard a lot of people kind of, let's just say, some people just keep wanting to emphasize, well, she was the aggressor in there, and the police said she was the aggressor. Okay, that's completely irrelevant. That's completely irrelevant. She didn't deserve to die. And as some people who are, again, more experts in this field than I am will tell you, she may not have been the aggressor. If she was in an abusive relationship, there's certain ways it's going to come out, and keep in mind that the witness who called it in, because it wasn't either one of them who called in the domestic abuse complaint. The witness who called it in was claimed that the man was being aggressive towards her, that he was hitting her and pushing her.
Slapping
and yet neither one of them says anything about that. That is an indicator of an abusive relationship.
Sure.
So I find that video was interesting just to see, warning signs and to know, track, where they were. But it does nothing to shed light in my mind on, the specific facts and circumstances of her death. That's going to be a different matter.
I think if anything, that body cam footage, and well, not only that, but the police reports afterward highlight just the difficulty of dealing with an abusive situation if it were that. Because a lot of times the facts get twisted, and from an outsider looking on, you're not really sure what the exact situation is. And so as Christians, and this happens more frequently than we'd like to admit. I think people are in abusive relationships and they're so afraid to reach out to get that help. And from an outsider looking in, you would never know that there's anything wrong in that relationship. And so the encouragement here is that if you or anybody is dealing with a situation like that, it's always best to reach out before something like this happens.
And I think another good thing we could do, and there's at the school level, and because I know our school here does it, and I'm forgetting the name of the law. There's a law that passed in many states, and including here in Maryland, that talks about, training teachers, for example, and school staff, how to recognize signs of abuse in a child. It'd be, I think, a good ministry for on a church side of things to have similar types of training for people in the church to be able to recognize signs of abusive relationships. Because like I said, watching that dash cam video, like I keep saying, there's people that are far more knowledgeable than me about it that can educate us on, what those warning signs are. But you're right. I think lots of times we don't see it, but if we know what to look for, maybe we could see it more. And then we need to be in the position where we can reach out to these people so that they know they have some place to go. They have support. I mean, here's what, and again, please don't misunderstand me. We don't know all the facts of Gabby Petito case. We don't. All right. But it's worrisome to me for a number of reasons. Not just the ones we've talked about, but if I'm correct that her mother was in New York and she is living in Florida, not just with him, but with his entire family in their home, that is certainly a scenario where she's so far removed from her other support system that she could feel trapped in there. And so that's another one that I saw that and it's like that I found to be worrisome to me, worrisome. Yeah. I will say from a legal perspective, there was something that came up in a story that I saw, one of the news reporting, I can't remember what channel it was on, that made me scream at the television. And it was a private detective, and this is before it was revealed that Brian Laundrie had gone to the nature reserve or whatever. He was in Florida. They didn't know where he was for sure, and he wasn't talking to the police. And there was this private investigator that was interviewed, and he said, well, he's going to have to talk to the police at some point. He's just going to have to. Eventually, they're going to get up with him, and they're going to make him talk to them. And as a lawyer, I'm saying, no, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. And we have, protections, protection again, Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, that he doesn't have to talk to the police at all. And I'm sure his lawyer has told him that, has advised him of that. And so for people that look at him and say, is it suspicious that he's not cooperating? Yes. I mean, this is one of those situations where understand this, he is legally allowed, assuming he's still alive, which he may not be at this point, based on what's happening today. We'll see. But he is legally allowed to do what he's doing. There's not a warrant for his arrest. He's not under arrest. He's still free to move. He doesn't have to talk to the police and is under no obligation to do so. That being said, when he makes that choice, he's got to understand that if he's not guilty, he's certainly making himself look guilty. Because if this is your fiance that you were in love with and you were going to get married to, you don't just come home from a cross-country road trip by yourself without her, without saying a word.
Yeah, you would at least think something to say, hey, help us find her, before they actually found the body or anything. Like, you would think there's something's not adding up. And
I will tell you, historically, you know that's also how most of these people get caught. I mean, that again makes me, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but you ask me, my gut feeling is, does he know more? Did he do something? The answer is yes, because I think he's been advised of this. Because I forgot the gentleman's name. It was a horrible case where a father killed his wife and daughters and put the daughter. I think they put their body in like a steel drum. I can't remember what his name was now. It's bugging me. Somebody, if they're watching live, can let me know. But there was a video that's been released in body cam footage of when the police first came to his house and he was reporting them missing and giving a story. And you could see that's how he got caught, because his story didn't make sense. There were inconsistencies and things like that. So do I think that's probably why Brian Laundrie isn't talking to the police? If I were a betting man, I'd say, yeah, probably. He has the right to do it. Doesn't makes him look guilty. And so from a Christian perspective, I mean, obviously I would encourage Mr. Laundrie to, you've got to face up to what you did. I mean, that's part of what our Christian faith is all about. And I have no idea what his faith is or anything like that, but we all mess up and we all sin. Obviously this would be a huge doozy of one, but isn't that what the Christian faith is all about? Is that, if you're only confessing and repenting on the easy stuff, then it doesn't really mean much,
Yeah. And I think, well, yes, all that being said, there's one other kind of angle to this. I don't know if we want to go there.
Which angle you want to go? I think I might know what it is, but go ahead, just go there. Who cares?
Sure.
If you don't want to go there, I'll just say, nope, not going there.
Well, it is a little, I'll get your take.
I'll say something and you tell me this is what you were thinking.
Okay.
All right. And I forget the politician's name now. What's her name?
I think I know where you're
talking. Yeah. And it's going to bug me because I can't remember who it was, because I didn't know we were going there, so I didn't print out their article. And maybe we'll disagree on this. I don't know. But there's there was a politician who basically says, well, the only reason the media is interested in this is because it was a pretty white girl,
Yep.
and that you don't hear all of the
thousands of other missing persons
persons. You don't hear a lot, and you don't hear a lot of stories about African American girls going missing and things like that. I'll give you my take on it and agree with it, disagree with it. I mean, if you were to look at the stories like this, the missing person stories that tend to garner national attention, do they tend to be missing white females? Yes, they do, by and large. That much I don't think people can really dispute. Look, statistically, that's the case. I would think, number one, statistically speaking, the majority of missing persons are female, or at least more female than male to begin with. And so, but I think, if you want to say, like Arsenio Hall used to say in his old show, things that make you go, If you look at the distribution, does that make you go, I wonder about it. It does. Is there enough on the flip side of the coin, though, is number one, is there enough on this story to say, well, that's obviously what's going on? No, this story, the reason it's gotten media attention is because there's sensational aspects to it. You've got to compare apples to apples if you're going to make this comparison. And I think it's legitimate to investigate, okay? It's legitimate to look into, absolutely. But if you look into it, you've got to compare apples to apples. And apples to apples aren't just the stories that get national attention versus all other missing persons. Because if you look at all other missing persons cases, I guarantee the overwhelming majority of them don't have this kind of storyline. And what does the media like? The media likes to tell a story. Right. That's what they want. You don't have a cross-country journey with someone who has body cam footage only a few days before, who has these mysterious text messages coming afterwards, who has the fiance who drives all the way back across the country to Florida without her and just doesn't say a thing. I mean, there's all these elements that I think are what attracted the media's attention in this particular instance. And I also am wary about, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on this one, but I'm also wary about bringing something like that up now.
Yeah.
It's like, especially because I think this just came out like 2 days ago, right around the time, either right before or right after, when the body was discovered. And I'm just like, I'm not saying it's not a legitimate thing to look into. I've said I think it is, as long as you're comparing apples to apples. Because if there is some kind of racist tendencies going on, I think we as Christians need to speak out against that. Sure. Absolutely. But now, I mean,
yeah, I agree. Number one, that is probably in poor taste to bring that up now, especially. I mean, I'll be honest. When I first heard about this story, I was like, well, what makes her case special from any other missing persons case? I wasn't necessarily going to that conclusion immediately, but it does make you kind of go, I think probably what had a larger, and this is just my speculation, but an aspect of this case, aside from the story, that had a lot to do with this is because they were big on social media, and they already had a large following, I guess, with the hashtag van life. That's kind of exploding right now. There's a lot of people who are going cross country in vans and everything. So the hashtag van life, it's a growing online community that kind of keeps up with that stuff. So there was already attention to it just because it had a social media presence. And then on top of that, you get all the sensationalism in the story. I think that all adds together. So I agree with you. If there's something there, that's obviously we want to speak out against that, but it's probably in poor taste.
And I just don't think you can necessarily say it in this case. I mean, it's, in other words, you can, on a broader scale, it's a question worth asking. I will agree with that. In this particular case, I don't necessarily think you can go so far as to say, well, the only reason this case is getting the attention is because of race. I think there's a lot of things about this case that would tend to count against that. Now, here's how I could be proven wrong. All right, here's how you would prove me wrong. Remember I said compare apples to apples. If someone can bring up, and fine, and I admit I don't know all missing persons cases across the country, but if you have a good number of missing persons of, people of color that are kind of checking these boxes and they're not getting reported, that's the kind of thing you would need to look for. Then I don't know. I'm not saying those aren't out there. I'm not saying they are. I don't know whether they're out there or not. So I guess I'm just saying I'm not convinced based on this particular case yet. I could be, but you got to have the right kind of evidence. You can't just say it and expect it by virtue of your declaration that it's true. That's basically it. So, all right. So now that we've walked through that quagmire, let's go to
Jump into another.
Jump into another one. Yeah. So, I'm being given the. No, that sound. No, I'm okay. Is there another comment? Oh, there's a comment just came up. Thank you. From RM. Young, pretty white girl went missing and ended up dead, so the world and media yammers about it 24/7. Americans do this like clockwork every few years. Come on, guys. That's okay. Remember, listen to what I said, though, okay? And I know there's a follow-up comment. I see it popping up on the screen there. I'll get to it once it pops up on mine. I'm not denying, and this says you need stats of missing non-whites that go missing without round-the-clock 24/7 media coverage. It's a question mark. So I guess that is like, I'm assuming you're saying you disagree with me on that. To some extent, I'll say yes. I mean, because you cannot conclude just because people have two distinguishing characteristics, all right, based on that fact alone, that the reason something happens is because of those distinguishing characteristics. It may, and I'm perfectly open to that. And that's why I try to say at the very beginning that, yeah, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that if you look back over the history of which cases get reported, sure, yeah, they're white females. I mean, that's absolutely true. I agree with you 100% on that. And so, yeah, I do think there's a legitimate question to be asked. I don't disagree with that. My only point of disagreement was with the statement that was made that was the only reason this case was being reported in the media. I think there's enough distinguishing about this case to say, no, I think no matter the reason this was getting, I think, picked up on was, like you said, because of the social media following, because of the sensational story behind it. That's why I think this case would have been picked up by the media no matter what. I think you may disagree with me, and that's fine. I just think there's enough unique characteristics about this one. I am not saying that prejudice does not exist in the media. Yeah. It very well may, and I do concede that. I don't think you cannot concede that if you look at the grand scheme of the number of cases like this that get media attention, you're absolutely right. They tend to be white females, okay? But I just want to be careful, because you got to understand there's also countless and countless and countless numbers of white females that get abducted that never make the national media. So it's clearly not just because they're white that they're getting reported. Now, the race may make it more likely. In other words, if you've got a million cases out there of missing persons, only a handful are going to get reported. And so then we take out of those millions and millions of cases, or however many cases, I don't know, there's millions, that certain ones get the ones that get reported. Okay, well, now the media looks, what are the good stories? What are the good ones to report? And then maybe that narrows it down to a smaller pool, but still too many they're not going to latch onto. Then maybe, you could look at it and say, does race have something to do with why they pick certain ones and why they don't? It may. I'm not denying that. I'm just not sure that this particular case is illustrative of that, but it certainly could. Let's see. He says, no, I'm asking if that's how you will be open to accepting my position. You're correct in saying that it's not the only reason Gabby's case is being followed so much. Okay. I'm saying that race tends to be repetitive in these cases. I'm not sure I understand that last comment. They're saying that race tends to be repetitive.
Just that it means most of them are white girls.
I'm sorry? I think we agree. Yeah. I mean, if I'm understanding you correctly, I think we agree.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe my last comment clarified, and you can tell me if it doesn't, but I think we're on the same page.
Sounds like it, or close to it.
Yeah. So, all right, I dominated that. I didn't know if you had anything.
No, it sounds like we're agreeing that it is. And I said before, when I first saw this story break, I was like, well, what makes her story so different and special? Mm-hmm. I didn't necessarily jump to that conclusion, but I'm also willing to concede that maybe that's a factor. I don't think it's the only factor. I don't think it's fair to say that.
No, but I can see it being a factor in that way I talked about. It's like, okay, we can't report on all of them, so we're going to report on the ones that make good stories. Oh, we still can't report on all of those. Yeah. So consciously, unconsciously, how do you select which ones of those sensational ones you choose to report on and which ones you don't? Could race be a factor in that? I don't see how you can say it definitely isn't, based upon the fact that overwhelmingly they tend to be white females that are getting reported on. You know, at least on the surface, that's enough that causes some question that I think we should be asking.
Do you think The fact that she said pretty.
It's okay. Look back at the ones that are reported.
I mean,
How is there an objective like
think about all
prettiness?
Think about
I don't know.
no, but think about
how am I going to answer this with my wife in the room?
No, but think about what happened when Jean Benet Ramsey
Right.
happened.
She's a little beauty queen girl.
Yeah, and all made up. She looked.
All right,
really...
I'm going to. There's a really good philosopher. His name is the Joker, and specifically the Heath Ledger version of the Joker.
Oh, we've just gone off the rails.
No, we haven't really. Because listen.
Okay. All right.
Okay. One of the points, it's a character writing. One of the points that the Joker makes in that movie, in the Dark Knight. All right.
Okay.
He says, the society has a plan. It expects the world to go according to plan. And he said, I could go out and I could get on TV and say, I'm going to kill a million gangbangers tomorrow and nobody would bat an eye. But I say I'm going to kill one little mayor, is what he says, and everybody goes crazy.
Right.
The same thing, I think, could be seen to hold true here with the John Benet Ramsey case and everything like that. The world has a narrative, has expectations, and when suffering happens in ways that are in accord with that expectation, and this is something I think we as Christians need to. I'm saying we shouldn't think this way. Okay,
right,
you understand me? I'm not condoning this. I'm quite the opposite.
Right.
All right. But this is the way I think society works: is when we have this plan of expectations and things they may be tragic, but they're still going according to our plan. Then okay, no big deal. But when things don't go according to plan, that's when everybody goes crazy. And here's how the race could play into that. You talk about, well, you have some cute, pretty little white girl from the suburbs. Well, those aren't the people who, that tend to get murdered according to this plan. The pretty little beauty queen who gets kidnapped out of her basement, the John Benet Ramsey case. Well, that's not what this plan says is supposed to happen. So, quoting the Joker, that's when everybody goes crazy, and freaks out about it. So, yes, I know I'm quoting Batman, but I'm kind of a Batman fan. But I think that actually was good writing because I agree that's the way that could account for some of the disparate treatment we see.
Sure.
And again, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm not saying this is not the case. I'm saying I'm open to be convinced it could be. Does the plan, the expectations of society, are they based upon race to say these types of things don't happen to one race, they do happen to another? Maybe. It's a conversation worth having. Maybe, maybe not. Some people agree with me, some people disagree with me, but I think it's a conversation we should have.
It's important to open ourselves up to at least hearing those perspectives and not just immediately shutting them down. And having an open, we're always advocating for open dialogue, a free market of ideas.
That's a really good movie, by the way, The Dark Knight, just saying. All right. Let's we never really got to our second story. We were about to get into the second story. We didn't get to it again, did we? Okay. No, it's good. It was great. So let's go on to our next story here. And that is that down in Del Rio, Texas, there were I'm going to try to report some numbers just that we're getting here, understanding that I think part of the problem with this story is
it's hard to have an exact
count. I don't know who do you trust as far as giving you these counts. Initially, when it was first started really breaking over this past weekend, we were being told anywhere from like 12 to 14,000 migrants, about 80% of which were from Haiti. Put a pin in that as far as what that means to be from Haiti, because that requires some clarification. Were gathered under a bridge just entering into Del Rio, Texas. And this is right on the Rio Grande. And so where the gathering point was, it was in the United States. So they had crossed the Rio Grande on dams and things like that. And there was a bridge going into Del Rio, Texas, which is a border town. And they had gathered underneath that. That's where before you get to the border, why am I drawing a blank? The office where you go and you can, request asylum or whatever it may be.
Border Patrol.
The Border Patrol is the agency. But yeah. So
CBP.
the point of entry, the point of entry. They hadn't gotten past the point of entry yet, but they were in United States territory, and it was like sardines being packed in there, where they were, it was not sanitary. There was not clean water. There was not enough food. People were just makeshift tents and things like that. Now, when I say about 80% were from Haiti, understand that not all of them were. It's not like they directly came from Haiti. Most of these migrants were supposed to have actually fled Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, and they'd been living in other South and Central American nations.
Cuba.
Yeah, and then they'd made their way up to recently. They'd made their way up, and so the question then becomes, well, why did recently they make their way up? Well, because the rumors were spreading on social media based upon some things that this administration, this presidential administration, had done, that the deportation flights to Haiti were going to be halted. They weren't going to send people back. That was, to be fair, that was a miscommunication. There is a policy about Haitians who were already in the country by, I think it was July 29th. All right. But nothing about anybody future coming. But regardless, you ever play the telephone game where one person tells something to one person, tells another person, and by the time it gets to the destination, it's a completely different message. The message that was being spread on social media was, borders are open in Del Rio, come on in. Yeah. And so that message was getting spread to people who were in these other South and Central American countries. And so they came up, and they were all sitting there outside of the border crossing. What's happened since then is President Biden has increased the flights returning to Haiti. Now the numbers don't match up. So the number of flights that are going out, while he's increased them, if you take that and compare it to the alleged decrease in the people that are under the bridge, it's like clearly they're not all going back to Haiti. And some of them they said they're taking to other states. They're taking to El Paso. There are a couple of whistleblowers, if you want to call them that, who have said, and some of them are just being released into the country. They're saying there's thousands of them that have just been released in the country. Is that reliable information? Is that not? I don't know, but it's out there.
There's reports at least of one vehicle that got hijacked.
A bus or whatever that got hijacked before they could be apprehended.
Yep.
And then there's also reports of the people in Haiti, that have been returned to Haiti, shocked and amazed that they're being sent back to Haiti, because keep in mind, these are people that haven't lived in Haiti for over a decade. And of course, Haiti's president was just assassinated recently. They just had another 7.2 magnitude earthquake, so it's not a good place to be. This is one of those really complicated issues, Ben, that, as a Christian, I think, and this is going to be a hard part, because let's start from the premise of we have to put politics completely aside for right now. We are not political. We are Christian. Yep. All right. And there's a couple different aspects of this story that are important and legitimate aspects. Obviously, one is controlling your border. All right. One is loving your neighbor. In other words, you protect the people that are here, loving your neighbor for people that are suffering. But then you get into the situation of, can you help it? What is the obligation to help people that are suffering? How far does that go? 70 times 7, that's forgiveness. But how do you balance this out? Because there certainly are people that are in this group that, certainly not all, and that's the other danger that people are concerned with. When you have this many people coming in, it's going to be harder to stop people that are bringing in drugs, that are doing human trafficking, things like that, because just the mass quantity. But then again, there's people in here that may be entitled to asylum. How do you sort all that out because of the problems they've been facing? So as Christians, how do we look at something like this where we're told to love our neighbor, but it's kind of, and I'll give you this scenario, okay? So loving our neighbor, I used to work in downtown Baltimore. I would pass 50 homeless people on some days, Do I have to take them all into my home? Do I have to take them all out to lunch? Am I loving my neighbor if I pick one or two and give them something or take them out to lunch? This is what I struggle with when I read stories like this. Sure, all right. Sure. It's balancing all of these interests that I think are all legitimate interests from a Christian perspective. Which is why I decided to introduce it, so you can be the first to answer the question.
I agree that you, as you said,
you agreed that I struggle with it. Thank you, Ben.
Because I do too. That's the reason I agree, is because it's a complicated issue, as you've said. That's what I agree with. It's a complicated issue that there is no, a lot of times, and here's going back to that, world narrative. We all look for that clear-cut plan, and this is something that doesn't fit neatly into, there's a lot of gray area. And to use a phrase that you've used a lot of times, I'm of two minds about this. From specifically taking a step back, leave politics aside, from a Christian perspective, yes, we have a call to love our neighbors. we also have a call to uphold law, order, justice, and all of these things. And those two don't neatly mesh in this scenario. Maybe it'll be helpful to look at it from another perspective. So, well, let's put a pin in that one. Going back to your example here. Yeah, pull all these out in a minute. Going back to your example,
Or an
driving past the 50. There's a homeless community under the bridge of 695 as you're going down into downtown Baltimore. You know, are we called to help every single one of them, or are we called to help as much as we are able to? There's a distinction there because, you know, God blesses us certainly so that we can be a blessing to others. I think there's no question about it that if we have the means,
especially since that is in Scripture.
Yeah,
you're right. I think there's no question about
there
that.
There is no question about that. So if we have the means, look at the Good Samaritan. Yeah, he helped as he had the means to. Perhaps, and this is maybe making a stretch there, perhaps there were other people in that inn that the Samaritan took the man to that were in need. Was that Samaritan obligated to help all the people in the inn? No, he was doing what he could, where he could. And so here's the other scenario that maybe it's helpful to place it in perspective. You know, if I've got my home and my neighbor has their home and there's a border between the two, there's a fence, right? And my neighbor falls on hard times and they're asking for aid, asking for assistance. But there's a hole in my fence and they just start, maybe they send their dog over and I start feeding the dog, you know, a little bit of extra dog food that I've got and send it back over. Then they send their children over and they can share in the snacks that my kids have. Well, then all of a sudden their whole family is now living in my family's home and we're helping as much as we can, but my neighbor's not contributing to the household and it puts extra strain for me to be able to care for my own children. At what point does helping our neighbor supersede helping our call to our own family as well? Right. And of course, I'm using a generality here, right. But, you know, that maybe that's helpful to look in that, you know, we are called to help people as we are able to. And so, and that's a difficult thing when you put it on a national scale. What is the ability that the U.S. actually has to help all of these migrants? Can we help them? Or is that going to create an excess strain on the economy? And this is where politics get involved, but the economy, crime rates and all, but there is extra danger in bringing all of that in. And so there's a tension there between loving your neighbor, upholding the law of the land. You know, you don't want to break that down entirely because you have no borders and you got no country. And so I think there needs to be a balance between the two. And this is why they don't pay me the big bucks. As you know,
I was hoping you were going to answer the question. You're posing all these questions. Where's the line drawn? I don't know. Ben, tell us. Where's the line drawn?
Well, I think the line is drawn as far as our neighbors. I mean, they're helping those who are coming across, and this goes beyond just the U.S. There's other countries involved. They've gone from Haiti to Cuba and there's a humanitarian crisis there because people are saying in Cuba you just can't live there. It's a dictatorship. You have no freedoms there, and so there's a process, I guess, is what I'm saying. As much as we are able to help, we need to go through the proper channels of helping.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, one of the saddest parts about the story, and I don't have the answer for this, is the fact that these people are being sent back to a country that they haven't lived in for 10 years. I mean, I see the counter argument. People will disagree and say, well, they should have known that before they left, and they voluntarily took that risk. I get it. But at the same time, I think that we as an American country and government bear some responsibility for that. And I think this goes into that you need to be very careful about what you say and what you do, because words and actions, number one, can be misinterpreted and have consequences. I think that this particular this illustrates, if nothing else, you know, people that advocate, you know, well, we should just let everybody in. Look what happened here. Look what happened here, where we didn't. And President Biden's policy was not to let all Haitians in. It was not. Okay, it was giving some amnesty to those that had already been here by, not amnesty is probably the wrong word. He wasn't going to deport people. Asylum. I don't even know that he was officially granting them asylum as much as just saying, as a practical matter, we're not going to deport you. You're still technically here against the law, but we're not going to deport you, kind of thing, is my understanding of it. But even he just said that as of anybody who had already been here as of July 29th, And look how that being misinterpreted
Has opened the floodgates.
has opened the floodgates. All right. Now imagine what would happen if it wasn't a misinterpretation. If that's actually what the policy was, and we just opened the doors, we'd be overwhelmed. We'd be overwhelmed. Now that in and of itself, here's where this should be an eye-opening experience for people. Everybody that goes on, and they say they're not to say you don't criticize America. We have things we should criticize, and we criticize things on the show. I'm kind of criticizing the current administration right now. But I also am very much aware of how blessed we are to live here.
Yeah.
Other people are literally going through all this to get into our country, then maybe we should not take it for granted, you know? But I agree with you. And that's what I struggle with, is where to draw that line, because what I don't like are the extremes. Obviously, the extreme of we should just let everybody in. If nothing else, this small example should show just how disastrous that would be for our country. Whereas the flip side of the coin is that we just don't let anybody in. You just turn everybody away, get them out of it. That also isn't, that's the opposite extreme, and that's not loving the people who are really in need. So we do have an asylum process. We should have an asylum process of being able to apply for that in circumstances. But we just need to be very careful how we, what we say and how we define that, so that we don't get these kind of misunderstandings that cause what is, I think, accurately described as humanitarian crisis. This was a very sad sight to see the way these people were living.
Yeah, and which leads to, again, going back to the other points that people are making on this crisis. I know there's several media outlets have been picking up this narrative of Border Patrol chasing these migrants away on horseback, carrying quote unquote whips.
Was not accurate.
Was not accurate. Correct. They're using reins, extra long reins to control the horses, and that's standard practice. These Border Patrol agents use horseback because you can't always use a vehicle in some of these places. A horse offers greater mobility off-road and things, to where some people may try to skirt around, and that's not like, if someone's trying to cross over illegally, they're not going to walk up the road necessarily. Right. And so you got to have different means of patrolling. And but this narrative has been pushing and again bringing into, I think, there's poor judgment to bring race into it, which several news pundits have. And it's just not accurate. And so that's kind of,
let's look at our
journalism.
Let's establish what the facts are accurately, and then putting Christ first, figure out how we should respond. That's the motto, or the approach I think we need to take. All right, we are already an hour into the show, and we still have 2 more stories to go. So, Ben, what is our third topic for the evening?
All right, not going into any more controversy tonight.
Although, really, if we're NALC, so this shouldn't surprise people about what our position is. But anyway,
it shouldn't. But for any of our other denominational brethren out there, and sistren.
Cistern?
I don't know.
Cistern, that's a word, but it doesn't mean what you think it means.
Brothers and sisters out there. This was actually, it happened back in May that the vote was cast back in May, I believe. But it actually was just official as of this past Saturday. The Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the ELCA, which Trinity is not affiliated with any longer. We are the NALC, so different denominations, still Lutheran, or still call themselves Lutheran. But the ELCA has installed their first transgender bishop. This is Bishop Megan Rohrer, and prefers to go.
This is why I had you introduce the story.
Prefers to go by the pronoun they, their, or them. So they were voted in as bishop by a very narrow margin, 209 votes to 207. Wow. So a 2-vote margin. They were voted in as bishop of the Southern Nevada District Synod, and are called to serve as bishop over this area of nearly 200 congregations in Northern California. Prior to that, they were serving as pastor at a church. So it's not like they just came into ministry. They've been serving as a pastor since 2003, I believe. No, I apologize. Since 2008. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Of the particular
of the
church since 2014, but a pastor, the pastor of the multi-parish call serving the homeless and hungry at Welcome Ministry from 2006 to 2014. Yeah.
So it's been
Master
in ministry at least.
Divinity in 2005. So
Yeah, okay. So at least since then. But anyway, so it's been making a lot of rounds as far as, they've been installed now as the official bishop of this synod. And now a lot of church leaders are responding to this. And from different denominations. So there's the Baptist response to it. I'll just read a couple of these. First let me read Megan Rohr's statement. They said, "I step into this role because a diverse community of Lutherans in Northern California and Nevada prayerfully and thoughtfully voted to do a historic thing. My installation will celebrate all that is possible when we trust God to shepherd us forward." Now, it's my understanding that Megan Rohr actually got into pastorship. That wasn't in these articles, but it was from another thing that I saw. Actually decided to go into ministry because they were kicked out of their youth group growing up because of they used to be just lesbian, but now has changed pronouns and are calling themselves transgender. No, as far as I'm aware, no surgery or anything has taken place. Just the change of pronoun is what qualifies for them to be transgender now. And were kicked out of their youth group because of their position. And then somebody else said, well, hey, why don't you go into ministry anyway and prove to them that there's nothing wrong with your stance and that you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. All of this taken out of context. So I'll just put a pin in that and just say going into ministry out of spite.
Did you pull out all the pins from the last story?
I don't know if I did. We may have some pins to revisit, but I'll address that right away and say going into ministry out of spite is generally not a good idea. But anyway, some responses to this. It says Al Mohler, president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, is one response. Says, I don't know what trans even means in this case. He said that he warned that the transgender movement represents an intentional subversion of the creation order. He said the biblical worldview begins with making distinctions. First, the distinction between God and creation, then the distinction between human beings and other creatures, and third, the distinction between male and female. He's quoting Genesis 1. He said, the entire transgender revolution is a revolt against the order of God in creation and God's intention for humanity. Now, again, this is the president, Al Mohler, of the SBC. Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Other people, Reverend Tooley, said that this new ELCA bishop apparently has a new historic identity within one of America's historic denominations by virtue of merely changing pronouns. The idea that gender can be manipulated so flippantly clearly contravenes biblical teaching that male and female are divine gifts and physical realities, not emotions, desires, or transitional identities that are self-willed. And it goes on, but practically a lot of other leaders of Protestant denominations echoing the same kind of sentiment that this is a move by the ELCA that has been a product of a long since, they voted back in 2011, was it, to ordain
that.
before that even, I think maybe it was 28. Yeah,
I think it was 2009 when they did something affirming of
same-sex
marriage, and then allowed clergy in 2010, I believe, are the actual years.
And so this is kind of your natural progression of that. So a lot of people are saying this really comes as no surprise coming out of the ELCA, but still it's kind of a subversion of the created order and apostasy.
Yeah.
So.
But Pastor Jay here chimes in. He says the only way to change that distinction is to break down the genders. That is happening. That's at seminaries as we speak, replacing Adam with earthling, no gender. To ignore that. And I'll tell you, and here's how. Look, obviously, like we said at the top of the story, we're with the North American Lutheran Church. That alone should tell you that we loved everybody, but loving everybody does not necessarily mean affirming everything that people do, and we do not affirm marriages outside the biblical context of male and female. We affirm the two genders that are synonymous with your biological sex. You know, that's kind of our position. So that shouldn't surprise anybody, I guess, out there if you're familiar with the NALC at all. That doesn't mean that we don't love people. Let's see. Okay. 2009. Yeah, 2009, I think, is when they first, correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor Dave, I think 2009 is when they first affirmed same-sex marriage. And then I believe it was the following year, 2010, that they allowed LGBTQ clergy. I believe. I could be wrong. Maybe it's 2008, 2009, but I thought it was 2009, 2010. They were about a year apart, though, as I remember. Now, the way that I think, and I'm not going to say that. It's going to sound wrong. The argument that is often made in these types of scenarios is, that, sex is not the same as gender. And so somebody can affirm that there are two sexes, which some of the arguments get confusing because then people talk about, people that, are, hermaphrodite, there's things like that. And so, well, wait a minute, why does that even matter if you're saying that sex and gender are two different things? It doesn't prove your point at all. But regardless, leave that aside. I'm not even going to put a pin in it. We'll just let that one go. But that's the argument that's made, is that sex and gender are two different things, and so you can theoretically affirm there are two sexes, but there are supposedly multiple genders. Well, then you get into, well, what is that distinction based on? And it's ultimately based on essentially subjective feeling. It's what I feel, and I always struggle, not even struggle, I don't struggle. This is my belief. I find it, shall we say, interesting that when you have a conflict between what someone feels and what their objective biology says, that we automatically assume that's the objective biology that's wrong and the feeling that's right. That's, there's a logical disconnect there for me. If you're saying there's an incompatibility here, so why is it, and what's the justification for why you automatically elevate the feeling to being the true thing and the biology being the false thing, to the point where, let's face it, now we're authorizing surgeries to alter the biology. Right. Why would you side with a subjective thing instead of the objective thing? That.
Can I interrupt real quick? I'm sorry. Since Pastor Jay is theoretically watching, can you just let me know if you're hearing any kind of static in your sound?
Are you hearing static on your headset?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the headphones or not, though.
Okay, well, if anybody can let us know if there's hearing any static on the line, we'd appreciate that.
Sorry, back to your point.
So that being said, now looking at because I really, again, where our position is on this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. So, it is what it is. I wasn't really going to go too far into that. Addressing the specific issue with the ELCA, I think what we're seeing here is a symptom of more than just, the affirmations in 2009 and 2010 and leading into this. Other people that are more familiar with ELCA theology can correct me on this. He says there's static. There is static. And yeah, Vladimir Pandovsky says, yes, there is static. Bring down check the gain on the individual channels. Maybe the gain's turned up, and then we can bring this anywhere. Yeah, on the actual board. That might be part of the problem. And I'll keep going, but just check the gain, adjust the gain. So we might get a little quieter here for a moment while she's making some adjustments. Does the volume slider have any more room to go up or not?
No, I don't want to do that.
Well, no, I'm saying if you bring the gain down, but it looks like they're pretty much up all the way anyway. That is interesting. I'm not sure exactly what's causing that. Check one.
Did that help at all?
Wait, so you're not hearing static just when we're talking. You're hearing static overall?
No, it's mostly when you're talking.
It's mostly when we're talking. Okay. But without hearing it, I don't know, and I can't really diagnose it. All right. The only other thing that I can suggest is, probably wouldn't make it be an issue if it was just us talking. If you click on the settings on the audio input on OBS, and you can check the filters that are on there. There's probably a noise reduction filter on there that might help get rid of some of the static. All right. Well, she's going to keep tweaking with that while I keep going here. Somebody that's more familiar with ELCA theology can correct me on this. I'm not as familiar with them specifically. Just speaking more generally to your typically more liberal leaning theologies. do tend to really redefine their theology. One of the points that Al Mohler made is he said that this isn't really even Christianity anymore. In his mind, way of thinking, it's a whole new religion.
Yeah.
Some of what he said I disagreed with, I think partially. Like he said in there, well, by redefining sin, they're defining a whole new religion. Well, I mean, what they're really saying is they don't think this is sinful. If they're just saying that, well, there's some disagreement even within the Christian traditions and denominations that would agree with tradition about, how to define, certain sins versus not sins. So I don't think a disagreement in and of itself, a disagreement as far as whether something's sinful or not. Okay.
Thank you. Why are you calling me during the show?
Was that who I think it was?
Pastor Jay.
Yeah. Okay. So just having a disagreement like that.
I fixed it.
You fixed
Thank
it.
you.
Yay! Was I right? Was it the gain up too high?
No, your volume was up too high and the gain was down too low.
Oh, so the other way around. Okay. So
I fixed it.
you fixed it. You're awesome. I think that, merely having some disagreement about whether this particular act is sinful or not is something that's serious and needs to be discussed, needs to be discussed from a biblical perspective. Does that in and of itself redefine Christianity? If you define Christianity as, Jesus dying for our sins and having to have the faith and all that, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, you can believe all of that and still think, okay, but I don't think this is sinful. I don't think that is sinful. That in and of itself, I don't necessarily think redefines Christianity. That being said, most of these liberal theologies really do redefine that.
Push the envelope.
Yeah, they tend to, a lot of them tend to focus more on really redefining what salvation means, redefining what redemption means. And so it really takes on more of a this worldly character where salvation and like, for example, redemption would mean redemption of our current social structures,
right.
Which,
it's a humanist almost kind of understanding. And
so I don't know for sure if that's an ELCA, and Vladimir Pandovsky does say it's better. Thank you, Vladimir.
Awesome.
We appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Vlad.
So a lot of the theologies do tend to really, they do step aside. So I think I don't necessarily agree with Albert Mohler's explanation of it. I do agree with kind of the conclusion that I do think a lot of these liberal theologies do tend to become a separate religion. And if you're willing to redefine, what the most foundational structures of the faith even mean, then it shouldn't be all that surprising when they redefine things like this.
Yeah, I think kind of what he was getting at there, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but my understanding and my takeaway from it was that when you redefine sin in a way that is subjective, when you can just subjectively make sin whatever you want it to be, then that makes salvation subjective also.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah. And so this, I mean, when I saw this, come out and he was, and the story came out that, the ELCA has their first transgender bishop. Did it surprise me at all? No.
It really didn't.
And I'm going to say this too, and this is maybe, I don't know if criticism is the right word. I do think, and this is speaking specifically to us NALC folks now, I do think we need to, not universally, please don't understand, I'm not painting with a broad brush with everybody, just something I've seen over and over again. I think too many NALC folks, because a lot of the NALC churches did come out of the ELCA, it almost seems to me that we define ourselves sometimes too much as the opposite. We're anti-ELCA. We don't know what we are, but we know we're not them, And
Right.
I think we need to get past that. I mean, how long it's been now since the NALC?
Over a decade.
Yeah, broke off from the ELCA. At some point, it's like you can't be defined by what you're not anymore. You got to be defined by what you are. Like the NALC says that we're defined by discipleship. Okay, let's show it. Let's stop focusing so much and looking so much at, oh, look, did you see what the ELCA just did? I got to admit, part of my story my reaction when I read this was, okay. I mean, that's I disagree with it. I think I've come on record about saying why I disagree with it before, but it's like I'm not going to be defined by it. Now, I will also admit that I came to the NALC, and I specifically came to Trinity after Trinity had already split from the ELCA.
Same.
Prior to NALC, we were still just Lutheran Congregations and Mission for Christ. We were identified with them. I don't think we were NALC yet. I could be wrong. So I didn't live through that separation. I did go through something similar in my last denomination. So, but I'm not going to say that I went through the pain. I didn't have a long history with the ELCA like I know a lot of people did. It's a relationship. It's a breakup, and I know it can be painful. But even if you look at me as an outsider in that regard, even though I'm NALC now, maybe that's the kind of voice we need to hear sometimes from someone who didn't go through this. Is, hey, folks, it's time to move on, and let's talk about who we are, not who we're not, so we can move the gospel forward.
Yeah, and maybe without putting too heavy of a thumb on it, it's almost kind of the similar pitfall is what you have over here. What the ELCA is doing is redefining their identity, or specifically in this case, their identity in their sexuality. And, you know, as the NALC or any denomination that kind of pits ourselves against or puts ourselves against a backdrop of what we're against, then we're placing our identity also not in Christ, but against in what we're not for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will speak just kind of broadly to the whole transgender thing, because one time, or one thing that we hear a lot of times as far as like a biblical, so from the Christian perspective here, this is why context is everything with Scripture, because congregations don't get like this overnight, right? Or whole denominations don't get like this overnight. There's a slow, compromise on Scripture, and so one of the key verses I think that people who affirm transgenderism point to is Galatians 3:28, where it says, there's no longer slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female, and that's kind of one of those things that they point to, and I want to just focus on that just for a second. Context. Sorry, go ahead. Absolutely. Context. He's talking about our identity in Christ, because we are all one in Jesus Christ. He's not making a categorical statement about there no longer being two categories. Actually, if you look at the Greek here, and yes, I'm going to go into the Greek, when Paul uses those three things, slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female, that's actually a bad translation, because it's really should be, that third one should be and. Because he uses the word oude, which is nor, so Jew nor Greek, he uses that twice, and then for male nor female, he actually uses kai, which is and. So it should say there's no longer Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male and female. The categorical difference is still there. That's not what Paul is saying, that he's erasing this categorical difference between male and female. Actually, that's a good thing that God created us as different genders, which are tied to our sexuality, and we're given different gifts and to be used for that one mission, that one being one in one accord in Jesus Christ.
Now, does that mean that we as Christians who feel the way that we do here, should be silent when someone is being, bullied, abused as a result of their gender identity? No, absolutely not. There's and that's something I think that sometimes this, us versus them mentality that even creeps into the church, it gets in the way of our identity in Christ. It's like, even if we don't agree on this issue or that issue, there should be some things that, okay, I don't agree with your gender identity, but there should still be things that I should be able to agree with you on, and we should be able to partner on, if the interests are aligned, so to speak.
Right.
And nobody deserves to. We're supposed to love everyone. Jesus really didn't leave any room for doubt about that
Right.
one. Yes, it doesn't mean you have to affirm everything, but it does mean that when an injustice is being done to someone, even if it's being done to your enemy, love your enemies, then you need to be willing to speak up and stand side by side by someone in that regard, in that respect. So, All right, we are running long, so we've got one more story. And Pastor Jay, if you're still watching, this one is inspired by you. This one's dedicated to Jay Jackson. No,
All right, so our last story is it's an op-ed by Rob Dyer, and he wrote this.
Do you know what the story is yet, Pastor Jay? Sorry.
This actually comes out of Baptist News Global. So it's an opinion piece, and really focusing on kind of the narrative that churches specifically, he's talking to church leaders more so, but the narrative that we were all kind of telling ourselves throughout the pandemic, and he's challenging that a little bit. So he says, years ago, we used to tell ourselves that young adults who'd strayed from the church would come back after they got married. When that didn't happen, we shifted our hopes and proclaimed they'd come back when they had kids. Some came back, but, and those we never quite saw that in weekly worship. So this whole op-ed is titled, he says, they're not coming back. So basically, it's a challenge to our thinking as churches that, we tend to make excuses for, and he says in here, making excuses for individuals and families, or we started editing the story, we told each other, making excuses for individuals and families who were not showing up. So basically, it's a call to face the music, face the facts, I think is what he's asking for, and find a way forward from that. We're seeing a decreased trend, and this was pre-pandemic, that younger generations were less interested, less engaged, less connected to the church at large, to institutional religion. And so they're starting to realize that churches now are starting to wake up. We were hopeful throughout the pandemic that we were having lots of online engagement, and we were hoping that would translate once we were coming out of the pandemic to people returning, kind of that mass exodus, or the mass, what's the opposite of exodus? Entritus? Into the church.
Influx.
Influx.
Yeah, influx.
You were trying to make up words today?
I
really
don't
is.
know. Copyright.
We got out of it.
Influx. There you go. That's a good word. But what we're seeing is not that influx. It says, what he's seeing is that, to quote the title, they're not coming back. He says and even not just people not coming back, it's a decrease in involvement. The super volunteers who used to carry 20 positions in the church are now looking to do just a few things. So volunteerism is down. Our regular attenders, we've talked about this before. Attendance that is regular is no longer weekly. It's now semi-regular. It's now bi-weekly or even monthly, or bi-monthly now. It's more diminished attendance, and those who were on the fringe are just fading away entirely. And the interesting note here, I think, is that they're not going to other churches anymore. They're just done. That's the difference we've talked about before, the nuns or the duns, who are just done with institutional church. And there's a lot of factors, I think, that vie for people's attention. And, we can sit here and lament that. And I think there is an appropriate response that we can have there of lamenting that. But I think the call here is not to stay in that place, but to look ahead. We need to see the situation for what it is, he says, and then understand why they're not coming back, and then understanding that there's no magic answer either. I think that's kind of stop making the excuses, and now start addressing the people, less and not so much the programs, and going after people, I think, is kind of his call there at the end, and just loving the people, and that's what's going to draw them to a relationship with Jesus Christ.
So Pastor Jay likes to keep me on my toes. He has switched to Facebook and now has several comments, including one that just posted as we were going through that from the last story.
Okay.
He just says it's a big story, not because of anti-ELCA, but because the Lutheran world is fairly large and influential, and other larger denominations are following the lead of the ELCA. Obviously, Pastor Jay, I'm going to agree with you on that last statement because you know my history. About another larger denomination that's following that lead or followed that lead.
In the Presbyterian.
But I, just to be clear, I agree with you that this is going to be a big story regardless. I guess what I'm speaking more to is, and what gets frustrating for me sometimes, and I belong to a number, there's, whether you go to an NALC group or things like this, or people are chatting. And I don't want to paint with too broad brush because I don't want to sound like I'm being like super, super critical. I'm not. I'm just saying it seems like, let's just say a good portion of the discussion still a decade later, even in these groups that are isolated NALC folks, is about the ELCA. And I mean,
there's hurt there.
And I think that's probably my guess is what's behind it. I just think at some point, just like any healing process, in order to move on, you need to put it behind you.
Don't dwell on it.
Yeah, don't dwell on it. And I didn't live through it, so I'm not going to judge. I'm just telling you what it looks like to little schmo like me. That it seems to me like it might be holding us back. That's all. And then in regard to this one, he says, we keep moving the line instead of looking at our practices. The pandemic just accelerated the line movement. Yay! Yeah. And by and large, yes, I agree with this author. I will say that, in that I do think that we have a history in the Christian church of, I don't know if excuse making is the right word, although he might have used that here. He
does use it.
Yeah. Justifications, or just, kind of trying to always look on the bright side of life.
Yeah.
That one was for you, Pastor Jay. Sorry.
All right. Are we going to get a copyright strike?
Thank That was a different Monty Python movie, but I'm sure he still got the reference. And so we kind of fool ourselves. We kind of kid ourselves. We tell ourselves stories that to try to, well, frankly, take some of the pain and hurt away because we don't want to almost helps us avoid facing reality. Like I remember seeing a study at one point, even the narrative for the longest time was that, yeah, people will fade away in college, but once they get married and they have kids, they'll come back. And I remember looking at some research that says, well, wait a minute. Yes, you're seeing people that age group come back, but if you break it down, it's not necessarily always the same people that, so it's not necessary. And this was just one study. I can't remember who did it. But it says, yes, you see trends of people leaving the church at this age and coming back at this age, but it's not necessarily the same people that are coming back as the ones that left. So you can't necessarily say that, oh, well, they left, so they'll be back when they...
And also not in the same numbers. So
yeah, and it was still low.
An overall decrease.
It was still an overall decrease. So, but we told ourselves this narrative because that made it easier to think that Johnny, who we grew up with in youth group, he'll come back to the church, eventually. And that's not necessarily the case. And as long as we keep telling ourselves those types of narratives where we say, oh, Johnny's going to come back once he gets married and has kids, well, that prevents us or gets in the way of us actually talking to Johnny and figuring out why Johnny's really become disenchanted and what we should change as a result. And I think that gets back to, and that's the line that we keep moving. And we don't ask ourselves, we don't want to change. And this is why I really like this one quote. And I think you might have, you touched on it here, where he says, we have experienced how developing healthy systems is essential for all church seasons to not just survive, but thrive. And it's time to admit we cannot move forward with our pre-pandemic approaches.
Right.
Things are different. And there was a way we did church before this pandemic hit. And the line or the lie that we're telling ourselves is, oh, once things settle down, everybody's going to come back to church. And so we can just keep doing things the way we've been doing them. And that's not true. I don't think that's true. The world has changed. The gospel never changes.
No.
And so we never change the message. The method of delivery and the way we go about communicating that message can and should change and has changed over the past 2,000 years. I mean, if you think, whatever's been, you've been doing at your church for the past, 30, 40, 50 years is the way they were doing it in the book of Acts, it's not, all right? It changes. I mean, in Paul, when he even delivered his message, his approach was different based on whether or not he was going to Berea or whether he was going to Greece or to Athens and the Areopagus. The approach to how he would introduce the gospel, he would alter based upon the culture and the society and the expectations that he was in at the time. The same thing happens over time as cultures change, as society changes. You find that core gospel message that is eternal, and you figure out how to communicate that in the changing culture. And I think that what this author is saying is this is one of those changing moments. It's happened. Yeah. The church needs to open up to that and realize that in order to be more effective going forward.
Yeah, and what you're touching on there's another article that I think kind of was in the running, but it kind of speaks to some of this. There's a op-ed about, it says 12 stumbling blocks to the gospel for this generation. So again,
it gets into why Johnny left.
Yeah, it gets into the whys behind Johnny left, like why Johnny left. And so there's 12 reasons I think were fairly well thought out. And this is written by
Johnny. No.
Joseph Matera.
That would have been funny if it was Johnny.
Yeah. But one of those things that you talk about is the religious language was one of them. It's number 6 on this list. It says, people in this generation are not as religious as the previous generation and feel disconnected when a believer constantly uses religious vocabulary. We have to learn to communicate using the, quote, language of Babylon if we intend to make a strong connection with this generation. We have to teach believers how to think biblically but speak secularly if the gospel will make inroads in culture. Now, he's not talking about using secular language per se, like, dropping F-bombs in the message per se. But I think what he's referring to here is we talk on the show a lot about using those Christianese buzzwords and all of those things, and it just gets lost on people who either have no connection with the church, didn't grow up in the church, or they had grown up in the church and have left, and now that carries negative baggage when you use those terms also. And so we have to rethink not the message. You're right. The message doesn't change. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But how do we relate that, that message? And so meeting people where they are. And I think that's kind of the balance that we're trying to strike here at Trinity, is that we've seen a growth in online connection, but also understanding that online connection doesn't replace physical connection.
Right.
And the goal is always to draw people into a relationship with Jesus Christ first. But then, what are those methods that we have available to us, and what are the methods that people are receptive to? And I think there's an honest evaluation that needs to happen.
Pastor Jay says, just blame social media like everyone else and be done with it. LOL. It's all social media's fault. It's
Millennials, they're killing the church industry.
It's funny you mentioned that, 'cause I just saw somebody do exactly that earlier today, but that's different. It's just a video I was watching. Something else that in that article that you shared that you mentioned the religious language related note. Another thing I noted was the religious behavior.
Yes.
The idea that this is sometimes in church the people have so many protocols, traditions, and rituals it scares new people into thinking they have to become religious robots to believe. We need to be aware of what. We may, whether it be language, whether it be the way we do church, what is a stumbling block to people and what isn't, because that's more important, obviously, that they hear the gospel message than, the particular method by which we go about doing things. And a couple of the other ones. See, Vladimir Pandovsky says, churches become pagan apostate when the gospel isn't preached. I mean, that is our identity in the gospel, absolutely. Transgender priesthood may sound wild, but Gentiles did it as a staple to their pagan cults for millennia. Only the pure gospel changes. And that's, I think, you look at... even the way the Bible describes some of the religious practices around them, I think there are a lot of people. The argument goes like, well, this is getting back to our last story, obviously, but when the Bible seems to criticize certain sexual practices, it's not meaning these committed relationships. It's talking about these religious practices. And Vladimir again says, not vain words and mighty sermons, just the gospel, the power of God unto salvation. We're already running late, so I'm not going to go into why that's incorrect, but I think there are biblical passages that speak more directly to this. It's not just when you're engaging.
It sounds like you just said that what Vladimir said was incorrect.
No, I'm sorry. You're right. I apologize. That's not what I was saying.
No.
I was saying what the example I just gave about the argument people raise is incorrect.
Right.
Saying that it's, thank you, Mary Kay. Saying that it's, that really they're only speaking to these religious rituals and things like that, not committed relationships. That is incorrect, and I think there are biblical passages that speak directly to that. But that is why, and I think that's why we need to focus on that. What defines us and what makes it, and that's what Vladimir's saying. The gospel message.
The main thing.
Keep the main thing the main thing. Jay Jackson here says, while I agree with Vlad, the challenge for the world is trying to figure out what the gospel actually is. Too many gospel versions out there, and this gets back to what I was just saying about those theologies redefine the gospel. It's a consumer gospel. Oh, I know where you're going with there. Find what works and go with it. Not condoning this, by the way, and I will vouch for him on that. If you know Jay Jackson, he is not a fan of this consumer type gospel.
Right.
We've talked about that many times. But you're right. I mean, we're talking about. I was talking about these more liberal theologies.
His name rhymes with whole protein.
Sorry. You could go with Messi Flantis.
Yeah, you could say that as well.
But these are all illustrative points of both, Pastor Jay's point and Vladimir's point. That we have to keep the gospel the main thing, and keep the true gospel the main thing, because our culture hears conflicting messages. You hear, whether it be redefining the gospel as this social justice movement or really redeeming our current social structures is what some churches are preaching. You've got others that say, name it and claim it. You pray for wealth, you're going to get wealth, and if you don't get wealth, it means you don't really have faith. And so, we got all these conflicting messages that go around out there. And could that also be, to tie it back into the story we're talking about, could that also be something that leads to disillusionment, leads to people leaving the churches? They're getting all these different conflicting messages, and they don't know what to believe, and they think Christians can't even agree amongst themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I say that's definitely a cause, and it's a subversion of the true gospel. When you've got other competing gospels, it actively subverts the true gospel, and people don't know what is right.
Yeah. I do want to hit on at least one more thing of that article that you talked about reasons why people are not or leaving the church and not coming back, whatever. And this is one that said no community and authenticity. What people crave the most is community. Everyone needs to feel loved and to belong to an entity greater than themselves. And it goes on to talk about how the part of the church's responsibility is to generate that feeling of community, that we are a community. And this also gets back to what you were talking about the growth of the online ministry and all of that, which obviously this is my job. I'm very happy with it. I'm blessed. And I think we're blessed here at Trinity. And I think it definitely has a function. Programs like this are a great opportunity. I wish more churches were doing things like this to open up opportunity for conversations and honest discussions. But an online community, as much as we use that term sometimes to describe, a particular YouTuber and all their subscribers, it's not a true community.
It's a fan base.
It's a fan base. Yeah. And what the church needs to really do, and this is something we do try to do here, and I just emphasized it in the Vision Team meeting this past week, is we need to make sure we keep emphasizing to people that are watching us online, great, glad you're watching us online. If you're here local, we invite you to come. If you're not, find a church that is local to you, because online worship is not a substitute for actually coming in person and creating those relationships and having that community. And so what's happened as a result of this pandemic, I think this is part of that shift, is people got so used to just watching online that sense of community was lost. And without that sense of community, you don't have the bond, you don't have the feel the need to come back to that, the connection.
Yep,
right.
Absolutely. Or it just widens the cracks that were there to begin with. If they already didn't feel a connection to their church, then the pandemic just kind of made that crack even into a gorge, and they're like,
they didn't have lots of, let's face it, lots of these people, and this is one of the articles made this point, I can't remember which one, lots of these people probably weren't connected in the first place.
Right.
Church was a thing to do. It was
just Easter, a Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
Christian.
Or even if they were coming, let's face it, a lot of people aren't coming to, they come to churches because that's one more thing we do, just like going, taking my kid to soccer practice or whatever. This is just what we do. Oh, okay. Well, we can't do it anymore. Okay. No big deal.
It's something you can just take off your schedule.
Right.
If the schedule gets overburdened, then church is just one thing that you can use to lighten the load.
Which is why we get back into that community aspect that I think that more than anything, what we need to try to emphasize, and I think you'll find that if you were to ask the Johnnies who left, why they left, a lot of it may be because they didn't feel a sense of community. I've talked to, people that, and it's hard, especially amongst in your smaller churches that maybe aren't able to have as many offerings for, different age groups or whatever it may be. It's going to be harder to build that sense of community, not impossible. Faith webbing, things like that. I won't go into all that, but you see examples of people leaving. They say, well, I didn't feel the sense of community. I didn't think there was something there that I was connecting with, or there weren't people there that I was connecting with. Mm-hmm. And as much as to some extent, you kind of think, well, are you connecting here with the people? Or are you connecting with Jesus Christ? What's the point? I get that argument.
We're just ambassadors to introduce you to Jesus Christ.
But at the same time, we can't shirk our responsibility is to love our neighbor and to certainly love our fellow Christians, and and part of that is making them feel, or making them, that sounds wrong, but creating a situation where they can feel like they're part of a community.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I think, is that everything? That is everything. All right. And let's see, I'm going to take one last look here. I don't see any other comments, so I will vamp for a few seconds just in case there's any last minute comments, because there's a 30-second delay online. So if something else comes up, I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to say it. But what's that?
We should show Ben what I showed you when he was.
I'll show Ben yes, Mary Kay created a hashtag.
Hashtag too many pins.
Yeah. Ben was pinning everything tonight. He
The
pinned.
next set piece is going to be a cork board with string and pins and all sorts of stuff.
Speaking of pins and you pinning everything, was that a thing when you and Katie were dating? Did you have any
Pinterest?
the Pinterest? Oh my gosh, she's so young.
Pinning things.
Pinning people. Like I was part of a Alpha Phi Omega fraternity in college, and one of the things, you get a pin and you pin your girlfriend. You give her the APO pin. You didn't do that?
I did not get that
You-
memo. No, I wasn't. No.
You could have been in an honor society or something.
Yeah.
They did all the pin. Vladimir does say the cultural gospel is about what we should do. The gospel of Jesus Christ is about what he did for his people. Less of the first and more of the second.
Yeah.
And I will say that I think some of the first grows out of the second. In other words, like, for example, you talk about what we should do. Well, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourselves. He says, love your enemy. Where I think that gets shifted is what has top priority. If, like we talk about in the show, we're talking about things from a Christian perspective. You put Jesus Christ first. And I think that, Vladimir's, in my opinion, where the gospel gets mixed up is that, people put that, and this is that liberal theology stuff, is where they put that cultural emphasis on top. And then, church attendance and all this other stuff kind of falls below that. Whereas you put Jesus Christ on top and you put the gospel on top and make that your top priority, then naturally flowing out of that are going to be some things about what we should do and how we should live and how we should behave.
It's like that classic example of your X and Y axis. Your cross, you've got your vertical axis of your God and people, right? And connecting people with Christ. That's our primary goal, our primary objective. And then the horizontal axis is connecting with one another. You love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
There you go. I like that. And Vladimir does say, God bless you, brethren. No more comments. Thank you very much. I was already on it. She's passing me a note. I was about to do that. Thank you, Vladimir, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And appreciate all the comments tonight. And Pastor Jay and Robert at the beginning, and RM. And my wife wants me to ask Vladimir where he's from. I think it's your first time commenting, as I recall. I don't know if it's your first time watching the show or not.
Cana,
But if you want to join, if you want to let us know, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But always like to welcome people who are. And of course, if you're going to say Maryland, or we're going to say we're at 1100 Philadelphia Road, Joplin, Maryland, come on down. You're invited. So anyway, that's our show for the evening. We thank you very much for joining us. Again, every Wednesday night at 5:30. Is there anything that I should be pushing right now? I'm trying to. He did answer. What did he say? It hasn't come on my screen yet. Macedonia.
Wow.
Okay. We always ask this when we have people watching from overseas. You were on top of it. You were on top of it. That was going to be my next question. We had somebody watching our show from Germany one time, and we asked them what the time difference was. 1 a.m. We need to let Vladimir go to bed.
Thanks for sticking it out with us and staying up.
Thank you very much. We're here every Wednesday at 5:30 Eastern Time in the United States. And we'll be back again next week with all new topics to talk about. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Mary Kay. And thank you all for watching this evening. See you next week. God bless.